things. All right, cool. So we're live. Welcome to week 2, day 1 of Echo. So before we jump into things today, I want to make sure that everybody is good on all the curriculum that we covered last week. So does anybody have any questions about anything InstallFest related, Git, JavaScript, Python review? Any questions about any of that before we move on to the new stuff for today? Okay. And as always, if questions do come up at any point in time, feel free to let us know. Again, myself and the other instructors are here to help with that. So let's go ahead and get things started. Let me find my VS Code, share my screen for. Okay, cool. So can everybody see my VS Code window? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Awesome. So, as I'm sure you guys have seen by now, today we're going to be talking about one of the coolest things in programming, loops. So, what do loops let us do? Well, one thing loops basically let us repeat an operation. So, what we could do is, let's say somebody gives you an array of numbers. So, let's say like num array equal like somebody give me like 3 numbers.
137.
Okay, cool. 137. And let's say we want to write some code. Let's say we want to add, I don't know. Somebody give me another number.
5.
5 to each element of this array. So how can I write, oops, forgot the commas. So normally what we and console log the results. So how would you do this normally? So if I wanted to get the first element of this array, what would I do? And then add 5 to that. How would I do that in a console log?
Just num array brackets index 0 plus 5.
Yep. Okay. And then we can do the same thing 2 more times, right? We can do 1, 2, and then if we want to, we can go ahead and go down here and just move this because I can't see what I'm typing. Run that, and then we get 6, 8, 12, right? So we're adding 5 to each of those. But let's imagine that this array isn't just 3 elements long. Let's say that this array has like 15 or 100 or an unknown number of elements. So we can't keep copy pasting this console.log statement every single time we want to add 5 to an element of this array. That's really inefficient, number one, takes up a ton of lines, number two, and is just a really, really bad approach. So let's go ahead and comment all of this out. So the nice and concise way for us to do this is by using a for of loop. So what a for of loop, let's make this a comment, for of loops. So the format of a for of loop is basically saying for, and then we're going to create a new variable, and we can call that variable number. And actually, let's just say let num variable of array. And then we say we put brackets, and inside those brackets, we basically just say, let's do stuff using variable. So how would this work in practice, right? So let's do the same thing here. Let's say we want to add 5 of each element, or 5 to each element of this array and console log the results. So what we can do in a for of loop, we can say for, and then let num of num array and opening bracket. So now num is first time around, it's going to be 1. Next time it's going to be 3. Next time it's going to be 7. So theoretically, we should be able to, instead of now saying the num array 0, num array 1, num array 2, we should just be able to say num plus 5. And that should do the exact same thing, which it does. So again, we got the 6, 8, 12 here. So again, the for of loop, I guess just to describe it, iterates over elements of an array. So iterating basically just meaning the fancy word for goes through it element by element and does stuff with them. So any questions about the for of loop? Okay, and assume not. If anybody does have questions, please let me know. So the one thing that we cannot do in a for of loop, though, is change the original array. So if we wanted to say, for example, like, let's say we wanted to update the elements of this array, right? So what we could say is, okay, well, let's say I want to add 5 to each element of this array. And instead of console logging the results, we want to update this array to do that. So we just could think, okay, well, let's say, num is an element of num array. So why not just say num equals num plus 5, right? And now let's console log num array. So if we do that, though, it doesn't work. So the for of loops, again, as we just saw, cannot be used to modify original array in that manner. So this is just a fact of life about how it works, because the way the for of loop works is basically goes and pulls out the value, not the reference of the array. So it'll basically say, all right, 1 is num array 1, so I'm just going to yoink that value and do whatever you want with that value, but you can't change the original. So that is something to keep in mind. If you want to change the original array, we will talk about how to do that momentarily. So
I had a question about that. Would it work if you, instead of assigning it as num, you did like num array brackets num is equal to num plus 5?
So that would not work in this instance. And here's why. So let's console log num. Because what you're saying, it would work if num was an index in the array. But the only problem is num here isn't an index. Num is an element, right? So what we could do is we can change 137 to be like cat, fish, dog. And if we rerun this and we print out num, num here is cat, fish, dog, right? It's not like a 0, 1, 2. It's not the indices. So because of that, if you wanted to change the value of num array bracket num, in this instance, JavaScript will break and say it's undefined because it doesn't know what num array of, for example, cat is. Like that just doesn't work for array references. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think I was mixing up with objects. I think it would work with an object, but not an array, right?
Yeah. But that is the thing we're getting to next. Also, let me just actually jot this down on the notes here too. So variable, which variable is element not index. So that is something, a super important distinction. And here, let's go change this back to our little 137. And yeah, okay. So that is the first loop type. The next one is going to be for in loops. So also just note, JavaScript kind of has I would say, slightly unhealthy number of ways to format their for loops. This is not the case for all languages. JavaScript just tends to be worse about it than others. So once we get to Python, y'all will be very happy that there are not this many different formats for loops for different data types. So go into what Philip was just alluding to. For in loops allow you to iterate over the properties, also known as keys, of an object. So an object here is different from an array. So you can also call the object a dictionary. So what we could say is, let's say you have a car. So what are some things that what are some properties that cars have?
Wheels.
Okay, so we'll make a variable called wheels, and let's say this one has 4 wheels because it's normal. It has 4 wheels. It could have like license plate. It'd say like I don't know what a license. That's probably not a real license plate. Hopefully it's not. And we could have something like make be like Toyota. And like year be like 1993. That's a real old Toyota, but don't know how it's still running. So we have an object that's a car, right? It has 4 properties. It's got the number of wheels, it's got a license plate, it's got a make, and it's got a year. So we can use a for in loop to iterate over all of these keys. So the format of a for in loop is here. Let's copy this over because it looks really similar. So, but instead of element, this time we're going to say property, or let's just say key. Let key, and now instead of, we're changing to in, and then array changes to object. And then here you can do stuff using the key. So let's try this in practice, right? So we'll do for we can say let key in car. And the first thing that we want to do is let's console log the key. And here, let me also just console log all of this because we don't need that. So when we console log our keys here, we get all the names of all the properties, all the variables in our object, right? We get wheels, we get license plate, we get make, and we get year. But what we can do is we can also get key value pairs. So at the same time, and this is going back to what Philip was talking about, we can do car key, like so. And the reason for this, again, is a reason we could not do this in the for of loops. Because the for of loops iterate over the elements. But for in loops, they iterate over the keys. And unlike elements in an array, when you have an object or a dictionary, you can access the element directly using the key. And you can get the value that it's paired with. So if we run console log key, it'll give us wheels. But if we get car, or car and then wheels attached to the car, like so, then it'll say, okay, I know that I need to go find the key that has wheels, but I want to figure out what value it corresponds to. So it should print out 4. But don't just trust me on this. Let's see if this actually works. So again, here it's going through these commands, going console log key. So it's printing out, all right, wheels. And then it's going to say, all right, I have wheels. How many wheels does it have? Let's go back to car. It has 4 wheels. And then it goes to the next one. All right, the next key is license plate. So the license plate shows up here. What's the license plate of this car? It goes here. and then on this car key bit, it jumps over to the license plate and spits out the license plate. And we keep on moving down like so. Or value, we can say that's accessed by object. So any questions about the for in loops? Okay, I'm gonna assume no questions. Again, if anybody has questions, please tell me. And now we move on to I guess now we can pretty much just move on to Python. So does any questions about the JavaScript stuff whatsoever before we move to the Python section for today? Okay, I'm gonna assume not. So let's jump over to Python demo. And so just like in JavaScript, Python also has for loops. However, where JavaScript has the for of and for in, Python just has for loops, which is a lot easier. So what Python has is the syntax of like for, I guess you can call it for element in iterator. And then here you just do stuff with element. So what do I mean by iterator? So an iterator is anything that can be iterated over. It's a very unhelpful definition, but essentially what this means is anything that you can iterate or loop over. So examples of iterators. The easiest one that we use a lot are lists / arrays. You can use ranges. You can use tuples, dictionaries. There's a lot of different types of iterators, and you'll learn more about them as, I don't know why I just started a web server, but you'll learn more about them as the course goes on. But the main one that we're going to be using, at least for this module, are going to be lists and dictionaries. So let's say that let's say that I have a list of people. So we say people, and we could say something like Anne, Bob, and Charlie. And let's say that now I want to make a function that says hi to each person. So the easy way to do this is to say print, and then we could say hi, and then plus people 0, and then print hi plus people 1, and you get the idea. But that is super inefficient and honestly rather boring. So instead of that, we're going to use a for loop. So what we can do is say for, and again, we have the structure here. So for element, so what's an element of people? Probably person, right? So for person in the thing we're iterating over, the thing we're looping over, which is our people list, then in there, we can go ahead and print hi. But again, person here is an element. So we can replace this people 0, people 1, people 2 with person. So if we run this, oops, not node, that's the other file. Let's hit our handy dandy run button. And we see here it says hi Anne, hi Bob, hi Charlie. So this is the simple way that a Python for loop works. It just goes down the list and does stuff. That's pretty much it. You can also use more complicated things like f strings, but we won't be doing that right now. So this one is going to be, let's iterate through list directly. No. There we go. But we can also do this a little bit indirectly. So we can iterate through a list using range. So have you guys used the range function in Python before?
Is it the equivalent to like dot length in JavaScript?
Kind of. So you can use it with the length function. But range is a different function. So here, let's comment this out. So what the range function does in Python is it will basically, well, you can see it here. So it'll give you an object with a sequence of integers from start to stop by step. So basically what I can do is I can type, if I want to get all the numbers from 1 to 10, I basically say, let's say print range 110. And what this will do is it'll create an array for me, or a list that has the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And well, it generally does. Okay, maybe that doesn't want to work right now. But here, let's create a loop with this. So let's say 1 to 10 equals range, and we could say 1, let's do 0, 10, and we can iterate through this list as well. We can say for number in 1 to 10, we can print number, and that usually works. Here, let's try just 10. There we go. Okay, so I guess it just didn't like the fact I was putting a start in there. But as you can see here, it prints out all the numbers between 1 and 10. So it goes from 2 to 9, which works out pretty well. So we can do something similar to iterate through this list. So let's make this guy Doug. So what we can say here is the number of people is going to be the length of our people list. Then if we want to iterate through that, we can say for I, let's say, so that's going to, or for index, let's say IDX in range num people. And what we want to do now is print hi plus people IDX. And let's make sure that works. Perfect. So what did I just do? So the first thing that we're doing here is I'm setting num people to be the length of the people list. Then here I'm setting up a range, which is going to be basically 0, 1, 2, blah, 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 all the way until we hit num people, which is all of the indices through all indices of people using the range function. So this range num people gives us 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as many as we have. Here it only do 0, 1, 2, and 3. So to show you that though, I can print IDX. And you can see here the index is 0, right? So for 0, we're going to go 0. All right, we're going to say hi plus people 0. People 0 is going to be Ann. So we're going to substitute Ann for people IDX, and we get hi Ann. And then we go to the next element in the range. Next element in the range is going to be 1. Index is 1. Then we get people of index 1 is going to be 0, 1. That's Bob. So we print hi Bob, and so on and so forth. So the benefit of iterating through the list using the range is we can modify the element of the array using this. So let's just note here, cannot modify elements of array. But here we can modify elements of the array. So let's take out index and let's instead say that people index is going to be plus equal Chuck. So that means we're going to say the first person's name is Ann Chuck, the second is Bob Chuck, the third is Charlie Chuck, and the last is Doug Chuck. But again, let's see if this actually works. So what we can do is let's print out people array before and after I do this. So you can see here, before it's just Ann, Bob, Charlie, and Doug. But what this does is it iterates through, it goes again. Index goes 0, 1, 2, 3. And now it says people 0. Right, so people at 0 is going to be Ann. So I'm going to change the value inside of index 0 to have Chuck in there too. So now the name's going to change from Ann to Ann Chuck. And then we're going to go to the next index, index 1. Index 1, people at index 1 is Bob. But because I'm calling it this specific way, I can change the value inside of index 1 from Bob to Bob Chuck, or whatever I would like it to be. So does the way that I'm changing the elements of this array make sense? Any questions about that?
Hey, I'm just curious as to what happens if you print num people after the for loop. Is it still going to print just the length?
Yep. So num people shouldn't change because we're not changing this value anywhere, but we can do that if you want. So you print it out after the for loop. Again, we haven't changed the number of elements, right? So all we're doing here is we're going through each element and just adding something to it. So like we're saying again, like Ann, Bob, Charlie, Doug, we're changing Ann to just a slightly longer thing. So because of that, the number of elements is going to stay the same. So this is going, and also we never changed the variable num people. But if you wanted to double check that the length stays the same and you print out len people again, you can see length people is still 4 because there's still 1, 2, 3, 4 elements in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
Yep. There are ways to change the number of elements in a array, but we're not going to talk about those today. Today is pretty much just about loops and dictionaries. Any other questions about how this works by iterating through a list using a range? Okay, I'm going to assume not. So we can also iterate by using something called the enumerate function. Iterate through list using enumerate. So what the enumerate function does is enumerate of a list creates a tuple, which means it has 2 values. So it's going to have an index and a value pair. So let's say, so we could call this like index comma person and enumerate people. So let's do print index, print person for now, just so you guys see how enumerate works. So, and also let me see if I can print the enumerate as well. Sometimes this works and sometimes this doesn't. Let's see. Okay, yes, that just prints the object. Okay, so forget about that. Let's rerun this. So what enumerate does is it creates index value pairs from a list. So here we have our list of our 4 people, right? Anne, Bob, Charlie, and Doug. But also, if you remember what we just did by creating our range, the range for num people was 0, 1, 2, 3. So what enumerate does is it basically combines those 2 things together. And again, so as we see here, we get an index and a value from our list. So what enumerate does is it says, all right, let's break this down, this one list, into 2 lists. So we're going to get the indices, so 0, and then 0 we know corresponds to Anne. So if I wanted to, actually, no, this wouldn't work this way. But essentially what we could do if we so desired was we could, so note that person is equivalent to people at the index. So if I run this just to verify, it breaks down our list into both a range of indices and values. So that way we can do stuff like this and access things both by their value, like with person, or if we want to change their value, we can change it using the people index notation as such. So let me just note down. Identical to print people index. But honestly, you're not going to use enumerate all that much. So don't worry about it too much right now if you don't understand how it works. But just know that it exists. And if there's ever a time when you want to both get the value from a list and have the option to change that value, using enumerate is a good option. So we can just say iterating over enumerate equals both direct iteration plus iterate using range. So it's basically a 2-for-1. So that is the gist of looping. We've got 1.5 more topics to go tonight that are definitely not going to take us as long. But plugging in my laptop here. Before I move on to dictionaries, does anybody have any questions about the JavaScript loop stuff with the for of or for in, or the Python loops with the iterating through the list, iterating through a range, iterating using enumerate? Any questions at all?
I have a question. Are we not going to talk about regular for loops in JavaScript?
Not exactly. I mean, we don't really end up using those all that much. Would you guys prefer it if I talked about regular JavaScript for loops?
I mean, I'm personally proficient in that. That's all I use for most of my coding challenges. But I was just curious if we were going to talk about that or not.
Okay. I mean, yeah, we definitely can. Let's see, where's a good place? Normal for loops. So the normal for loop in JavaScript has a really simple format. So it's just for, and then let variable equal some initial value, variable either less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, final value, and then you can say variable step size. And then using that, you can just do stuff with your variable. So really quick example of this, let's say for, let's say let num equal like 10, num greater than or equal to 1, num equals num minus 1. And let's just console.log num. So would anybody like to walk me through what this for loop will do before I run it?
Yeah, so we're setting the initial I guess variable to 10, and then you're saying as long as this can keep going, looping until this condition is met, which is num greater than or equal to 1, and then
Right.
increments it after each iteration.
Yep. So here, let me just switch back to my folder. Echo demos, and let's just run. We run this code now. We get a descending check, right? It starts off at 10, we log 10. And then after this is done running, we go to the step and we step down by 1. So num becomes 9. So num is now 9, we log 9 and we go there. We step down again, we go 8. 8 is still bigger than 1, we step down, and so on and so forth until we get to 1. 1 is bigger than or equal to 1. And we print 1. The number now goes to 0. Num equals 0. 0 is not bigger than 1. So it exits the loop. So this is the super easy way to do for loops in JavaScript, which is, again, as Jesus pointed out quite well, this is the normal way to do them. But for special cases, like use it, again, if you want to iterate over an array, you want to use, it's a better practice to use a for of or a for in loop instead. You can use regular for loops to modify parts of an original array. So let's also note here can be used to modify array elements. So let's comment this out. Let's say we have an array of animals, or let's do numbers again. We could have like 3, 4, not an L, that's not a number, 10, -2, 105. So this is, let's say, 5 things long. So what we can do now is we could say for let index equal 0, index less than how do you get the length of an array in JavaScript? Does anyone remember?
Numbers.length, I think, with parentheses at the end.
Yep. And let's do index plus plus. So that means our index is going to keep going up. And let's say we want to do numbers at that index is going to times equal 3, let's say. And we can print numbers. So, no. Okay, numbers.length is not a function. Here, let's try this.
Also console.log.
Oh, thank you. Let's try that. There we go. Yeah, so they're numbers.length without the parentheses, and thank you for catching console.log. But basically, you can see here that by iterating through the indices of the list using this let index equal 0, index less than the numbers, then we can access the element of that array, change it, and then console log. But if we used this for of loop format, we would not be able to change it. So keep that in mind when using for of loops and also regular for loops in JavaScript. Any other questions about for loops?
Essentially, what changes is like if you can go one at a time with the for of, but then you can customize if you want to go 2 at a time, for example, 3 at a time, then you can do that with the regular loop.
Yes, that's correct. So the for of and for in loops, by definition, they go element by element, or like key or property by key. But for the normal for loop, you're just giving it numbers. So it can do whatever with those numbers. You can jump by 5, you can do like +5, you can like divide by 10. You can make your steps however you want to make your steps. So yeah, you can skip by 2 or 3 or however many you want using the normal for loop if that's something you need to do.
So I'm like Jesus, I always use normal for loops a lot more. Is there any benefit to use for in or for off over the normal for loops?
So for of is more concise. Like if you're just going through an array and pulling values out, it's easier to use for of instead. Because again, like if you see here, for your normal for loop, you have to like create a value for the index, and then you have to get the length of the array, and then you have to, in order to use the array element, you have to call it and so on. So it's slightly more, I guess, like complex on the eyes compared to just saying let's just yoink the element out of this array and do stuff using the element. Like this is a lot more compact. And it's the same thing for in loops. Like if you have a dictionary or an object and you need to get a bunch of values from it, it's just easier to use the for in loop instead of getting a list of all the keys and then getting the length of the list of all the keys and iterating over making a variable that goes from 0 to the length of all the keys and then putting the keys into key value pairs. It's a bit messier. So it's just easier to use the for of and for in loops for those specific use cases. However, if you could also, though this would be a little bit weird to do, you could use a for of loop to modify an original array. But the way you do it is convoluted and not something I can recommend whatsoever. If you want to try it on your own, basically what you would have to do is get the element out by using the let elements of array. Then find the index of that element in the array, then call the index of that element in the array and change it individually. That's really ugly. The easy, simple way to do it is by just using the regular for loop. So each of them have their own use cases. Most of the time, you'll probably either use the regular for loop or the for of loop. For in, I personally have never seen it used, but it's something very good to keep in mind in case you end up having to use it at some point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, great. So we are not done yet. There's still, again, 1.5 topics left. So the one topic that we're going to talk about are dictionaries, also known as key value pairs. So they're basically like JavaScript objects, but Python. So how can we create a dictionary? So let's say that I'm checking out a book from a library, right? So you could say like the title of the book is going to be, I don't know, my first storybook or something. You could say like author is going to be writer, which is definitely a writer's real name. You could say like checked in, and you could make this a Boolean, like true or false. And you could say like year, and it could be published in like 2020 or something. So this is how you can set up a dictionary. So how would I be able to, for example, get the title of this book? Right? Well, I would type book, and then in parentheses, much like we did in JavaScript, we just get title. And if I were to run this, Oh, that's Node.js. That's the wrong one. Python. That should not have happened, and I do not want to know why it crashed. Okay, let's see if this will work. I just comment everything out because I do not know why it stopped running. Okay, so that did work. So it wasn't a code thing. It was a VS Code being VS Code issue. There we go. Okay, I don't know why VS Code decided to conk out. But basically, in order to access the value corresponding to a key, so you want to get the value associated with title, you just do book, square bracket, title, closing square bracket. Super simple. Now you can also combine dictionaries and lists together. So we could say like people who checked, or let's say previous owners. Let's say, let's change this to O, and we can make this a list of like Sue, Chuck, and Bob. So if we want to get all the previous owners of this book, well, it's a simple matter to just get previous owners like so, and hit run, and we get our list of Sue, Chuck, and Bob. Now, at the same time, we can also make a book and represent it using a list, right? We can say like the title, or we can, instead of title, we would just copy this as an element of our list. We could say the author is element 2. We could say that it is checked in. We could say it was published 2020, and so on. And we could say previous owners are these people. But which one looks like a more useful format to use for a book? Is it better to use this dictionary format, or to use this list format when thinking about which one is easier for us to understand?
I would say the dictionary one.
Okay. What do other people think?
I mean, the one upstairs. I have a question. So using the curly brackets to make this dictionary, isn't that the same as a tuple?
Yes. So dictionaries and tuples are very, very similar in format.
And I guess like somewhere I was studying that you can't change those, right? Like if I assign a value to inside of a tuple, can I change it?
That is actually a good question.
The tuples are parentheses and not curly brackets, and the tuples are immutable, but the dictionaries are not.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Phil. But yeah, so if you wanted, you probably would not want to make book a tuple, but if you did, you would basically take this and swap those for these. And generally, you don't use tuples all that often. Most of the time, you'll see tuples used within a list. So and tuples are also generally used for only like 2 or 3 elements. You'll see tuples used a decent amount if you have like a collection of data that you're importing. So let's say like data points. Then you have a list of tuples with like 1, 2, 3, and then like the next tuple could be like 3, 9, 2, and then another one of like 4, -5, 3. So it's useful for applications like that, where you have like fixed coordinate data that you're trying to manipulate in some way. And basically just think of a tuple like an XY coordinate, kind of. Like that's the way that I like to think of it for a use case. So they're similar to lists, but they are immutable. They are always ordered. And you can also create them using they're also one of the only built-in data types in Python like that. So hopefully that helps. But we will be covering tuples a little bit more in the data structures unit, which will be coming up in a few weeks.
No, but I think I got it. The thing is that tuple is the parentheses, and
Yes.
then dictionaries is the curly brackets. That's all I think I was confusing.
Yep, so tuples are the parentheses, dictionaries are the curly brackets, and the dictionaries have the key value pairs. Tuples do not have the key value pairs. Any other questions? Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is how we can combine books and loops and dictionaries together. So let's just call this one like book one. So then let's also say that we have a second book in our book collection. We could say the best cookbook ever. We could say it's by Gordon Ramsay. And we could say it's not checked in. It's published in 1945. And let's say that this one was not owned by Chuck, and it was only owned by Sue and Bob. And just for good measure, because we like making multiple things, let's come up with a third one. And we could say this is called Cars. And we could say, I don't know, fast person. This is checked in. This book was made in 2000. And let's say that Bob and Angie owned this book. So these are the 3 books in our library. So how can we represent our library of books? Well, we can put these 3 book dictionaries into a list. You can say book 1, book 2, book 3. And this library now contains the book 1 dictionary, the book 2 dictionary, and the book 3 dictionary. So let's say we wanted to get the titles of all the books in our library. So how can I do that using a for loop? Any ideas? So for starters, how can I get every book in our library? How can I iterate through this list?
You could do for book in library.
Okay, that sounds good. Yep, so for a book in library. So that will give us each of these individual books. So now, once I have a book, how do I get the title of that book?
You could do print book brackets title.
Okay, cool. So let's see if that works. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, it looked like it was lagging out a little bit. But yeah, so thank you for that help, Noel. So again, to reiterate what we just did, we have our list of all the books in our library. So we can go element by element. So do for book in library. So the first book we get is book 1. Now to get the title of book 1, we go back up here and we see, okay, we have the key of title. So I'm going to go ahead and get the title and putting in brackets of book 1. But oh wait, book 1 is just represented by book. Then just do book bracket title. So how does this work in practice? So the first book is going to be book 1. Then we go get the title of book 1, which is my first storybook, which is down here. And then we can move on to the next one. Now we get book 2 is our next book. So we go up to book 2. What do we want to do with book 2? We want to get the title of book 2, which is the best cookbook ever. And then we print out the best cookbook ever. And we can just do that on down the line. So if you have a list of dictionaries, this is the easiest way to iterate through them and get attributes and change them and such. So you can combine lists and dictionaries using this sort of method. We can do more complicated things as well. So let's say we only want to get all the books that are checked into the library. So how can I check if a book is checked into the library?
You could write a conditional.
Okay, so how do I do that?
You can do if book brackets checked in equals true. And then
Okay. But we don't even need to say equals true, because
Okay.
this statement is, if it's true, then true equals true is pretty much always true. We can skip the equal sign. So, yep, we can do if the book is checked in, then we can print the book's type, right? So let's run this. Hopefully it decides to run and not quit on me. Okay, I don't know why that error is happening, but as we can see here, it prints out my first storybook and cars, right? So how can we verify that this is working? So it goes and gets book one, which is this guy. Then we check, hey, is book one checked in? It is checked in. So then we can get the title of book one, which is my first storybook. Then we move on to book two. So we go to book two. Is book two checked in? It's not. So then we skip it. And then it moves on to the last one in the list. It's book three. Book three. Is book three checked in? It is checked in. So then we can get its title. So we can make these operations as complicated as we want to. But I'm going to leave it here for now, just because there's not really a need to, for purposes of demonstration. That basically concludes lecture material for tonight. There wasn't a ton, but this stuff is pretty important. So if anybody has any questions about tonight's material, please share them. Okay, if not, I am going to do a new share. Hopefully everyone can see my browser now.
No.
I'm still seeing your
No.
VS Code.
All right. Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So for tonight, we have 4 main challenges, which you can get to from our README, as always. And also tonight, as always, the lecture material is pretty closely related to the README. So if you guys have questions, feel free to ping me or one of our TAs. I think I saw Tiffany here a while ago. Yep, Tiffany's here. So feel free to ping one of us, and we can more than definitely help out with any questions you have. We've got 4 challenges. So the first one is going to be about reading errors, which is really important and a good skill to have for debugging. So you've got this pot file, errors.py, run the file, it will break, figure out where things are breaking, how they're breaking, why they're breaking, and just try to fix it as best you can. The next one we have is our factorial challenge. So the factorial of a number is you give it the number and then you multiply that number by that number minus 1 times that number minus 2, all the way down until you get to 1. So make a function that outputs the factorial of a number. Note that this challenge is in both JavaScript and Python, so you'll have to submit it in both languages. The same thing for this one, linear search, JavaScript and Python. Basically, linear search algorithm works where you start at the start of a list and you sequentially go through the list, checking if you have found the specified element. If you can find the element in the list, then output the index. And if you don't find it, then return null or not applicable or It's undefined. And this has two releases. So you've got a global linear search, which is more advanced, and the basic linear search, which is where you're going to start off. And the last thing we've got is a palindrome challenge, which basically asks you, hey, if I'm going to give you a word, double check that this word reads the same forwards and backwards. And it should be able to handle numbers. It should be able to handle integers, which are the same thing, just not decimals, and should be able to handle strings. And yeah, that's it for the challenges. Lastly, have you guys gotten a chance to check out this 4 before me debugging checklist yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay, cool. So it's really simple, but this is something that I want you guys to keep in mind throughout, not just today and not just this week, but throughout the cohort. But this is basically the official quote unquote code platoon debugging checklist. So if you run into a problem or an error, or you're like, I'm not sure how to do this, the first thing that I always recommend is talk through your code out loud. Sometimes it can be a little bit silly talking to yourself or talking to a computer screen, which is why computer programmers invented something called rubber ducky debugging, which is basically where you get a rubber ducky or a stuffed animal or like a glass of water or a thing that you talk to and talk out your debugging process with. So like if you run into a problem that you don't understand, just start explaining your code to your rubber ducky or to your assigned thing. And that genuinely helps clear up a lot of the problems that you have, because you'll realize in talking things out to yourself, this doesn't make very much sense. Why did I do it this way? Let me try something else. Or, oh, that is a really glaring syntax error. I definitely see that now. Let me go and change that. So highly, highly, highly recommend talking through your code out loud and your steps and your thinking. Now, before asking an instructor like myself for help, we want you to go through these 4 steps. Not the 4th one just yet, but the first 3 for sure. So first, go through the error logs that your code gives you, step through your code, go step by step, comment things out, comment things in, print statements, the works. Go through your code as rigorously as you can to try and find this error. If you still can't find the error, try looking up the error code or whatever problem you're having in Google or Stack Overflow, or Google usually gets you to Stack Overflow anyway. If that doesn't work, just ping one of your classmates, or if you guys are working in a group, ask one of your group members, hey, I'm having this issue. Can you help me figure it out? And then after that, let's forget step 4 for now. But if you can't solve it after asking another student, come to me or Tiffany or one of your other instructors or TAs and be like, hey, we followed the checklist, we're still stuck. Now, the reason that we have this checklist is not to prolong the amount of time that you guys spend debugging and racking your brains over a missing comma. It's a very integral part of the programming process and becoming good developers to be a good debugger. And this is a skill that we want you guys to start developing as early as possible. And this has been proven to be a good way to do it. So follow the 4 before me checklist before coming to us for assistance. But that being said, please do not feel shy about coming to an instructor or a TA for help. We are here as resources to help you. That's the whole reason we're here, and we're more than happy to do so. Just ask. Yeah, that's about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and shut up.